Blaine Gray here from Plastering Beginners, and today we're going to talk about the Refina Powerfloat. Starting off, this is an amazing bit of kit, but it does have its limitations, it does have its uses, and what I'm going to do is walk you through a video on why this is a tool to choose, but not only that, how and when to use it. Basically, it's not an easy thing to get used to. It's a total different way of rendering. So in this video, you'll watch me rendering a wall. It's only a little wall, 10 meters plus, but it's just a good visual guide on what this tool can do. So what I'm going to do is give a full review on the Refina Powerfloat. You'll see it's been battered, it's been used. So I've put it through the trenches. I've used it quite a lot now, and I must admit it took me a bit of time to find out how to work it. But now, knowing what I know, I'd like to walk you through why this is so important to have as a tool for your rendering. So what we'll do, I'll show you how it works, I'll show you when I use it, and I'll just show you the pros and cons to this tool, and you can find out for yourself whether this is worth you getting. So what I'm going to do is just get straight into it. I'm going to show you the tool, I'm going to put it to action, and you're just going to see what it can do. Also, if you keep watching, you'll find out what it's like to render in winter and what happens if you get caught out. So make sure you watch to the end of the video because, yeah, it goes down. Cool, let's get into it. Cheers. Okay, let's jump straight into it. And I just want to show you first off what this machine can do. I just want to give you a little demonstration before we talk about anything else, really. As you can see, it really is eating up the wall. It's just a simple device. You've got one trigger, one button, and all you do is press it when you need to use it. It is, you have got a bit of sensory action on it, so if you want it slower, just release the trigger a little bit, and it is speed related, so it's very, very easy to use, and as you can see, the results are very effective. It's just floating the wall like nothing, basically. It takes a lot of time out of the job, and a lot of stress on the body as well. So this is a quick demonstration. I just wanted to show you before we talk about it what it's capable of, basically. So again, one button, you hold on to it, fairly easy to use, and you just take your time, and look, the results speak for themselves, really. But what I'm going to do in this video is walk you through how this device works. It's not the easiest thing to begin with, so I just want to give you a little guide on when and how to use it for the best results. And then we'll go into the pros and cons and decide whether this is actually something worth investing in. And we'll talk about price as well to see how much it actually costs. These things often aren't cheap. So let's get into the nitty gritty now. First off, I'm going to show you when to use this machine, and I'm going to show you how to use it for the best results. So that was a demonstration. Let's get into it. Let's do it now. As you can see, this is me forming an edge. They didn't want beads on this particular job, so I'm forming the angle with a straight edge and using my little float just to get the finer details. But from the video you can see the render is quite wet. It's a bit sloppy, and you'll find it does catch on my float at points. I think you'll find it in a minute. You'll find it catches. It is still slightly wet if you were to do it manually. Now this is the perfect time to use your Powerfloat. When it's slightly wet, when it has that, when it's just going green, that is when you want to be using the Refina Powerfloat. Like I said, if you're using a hand float, it's a bit trickier at this stage, but I found the best results were found when it was wet. So this is the ideal time to use a Refina Powerfloat, like we said. Sorry to bang on about it, but it's best to do it when it's slightly wetter. And that's because it's got a much bigger head, it's got a bigger surface area, so you don't have to worry about getting chewed up or caught up in the render. That bigger surface area is what allows to get you flatter walls. It's what makes the floating process easier, and it's what gives you better results. The bigger the float, the better the results you've got. So I'm going to go into a few cons. First off, the corded device can be a bit annoying sometimes. The cord gets in the way. As you can see, I've flung it over my shoulder. It's not the manufacturer's fault. Unfortunately, you need power to run these things. So the cord can get in the way. The other big con is if you want the cordless version of the Refina Powerfloat, then it is bloody expensive. I won't go into pricing, but I think it's around 800 quid. So it is quite dear. I mean, the corded one is a lot more reasonable. You still have to pay up front, but I think it's around 300 to 350 quid. What I'll do, I'll leave a link below this video and you can check out the price for yourself. I'll do that after the video, so I can't actually give you details at the moment, but that is the cons. But now, the cons aside, this machine is unbelievable. It just flattens the wall and takes all the stress out of the job. So the biggest perk is the fact that once we've used this Powerfloat, we've never had the render so tough. It really compresses the render in tight, and it just makes, after the job, you tap it on the wall, it feels solid. And that's it just compresses the render a lot more than what any humans can. And it's because it's a machine, it's oscillating, and it's working at a much better pace than what we are. So that is one of the biggest perks to it. To me, that's the biggest reason to get this device. The other reason is it's very easy to use. It's just one button, it's just a handle. You literally just plug in and you go. It is a really easy tool to use. Once you get used to using it at which stage, like I said, it likes to be slightly wetter. That's the only thing you will have to get used to, is just finding the right time to use the Powerfloat for the best results. Basically, it does take a bit of time. We've done a lot of testing, but we found, like we said, the best time to do it is when it's slightly wet, and that's just the way it is, basically. So what I will say is, I'll show you now what happens when you've got a few low spots in the render. I'll show you what to do when there's a few areas that are missing. It's fairly simple, but yeah, let's do that now. Okay, so now we want to fill the bottoms. So what I've done, I always keep some gear from the beginning left over. So take some of the hard render and use that to fill in the bottoms. Grab a bit of your render, fill the bottoms roughly to how much you need. Grab some gear. So you fill the bottoms, and now immediately go on it with the Powerfloat again. You'll find it'll just use what it needs. It will flick some render off. Don't be scared when the float flicks some render off. It's like any floating. If there's any high spots, you want this float to take it off. So don't be worried when it is flicking a few bits of render off the wall. What you don't want is for it to take too much off. You'll find when you're using this machine that it can sometimes chew into the wall. And the other big thing is, if you are going to use a Powerfloat, make sure you rule your wall completely straight. This isn't a miracle grow. This literally does rely on how flat your wall is. If your wall isn't flat, don't use this machine. So it all relies on how well you rule the wall. So that's the only thing I will say. Make sure when you're ruling that you rule the wall completely flat, because if there's any dips or any undulations, it doesn't like it. The Powerfloat doesn't like it at all. So you need your rendering and your ruling to be bang on before you use this machine. That's the only warning I will say, is just make sure you take your time when you are ruling off, because it doesn't like it otherwise. And I don't just rely on this, I also do a bit of manual floating after it. But this is what happens when you render in the winter, when it's a bit too cold. Dark. Right, it's pitch black. The render's setting. What I like to do after Powerfloat is give it a normal float. So I'm going to give you a quick show on that. I'm going to try and get a finish in the dark. I literally just use the float now. It's just to bring out any lines. It isn't perfect. I do find you have to give it a manual float. A lot of renderers don't. But I like to give it that little touch. And you really don't have to do much with it. But the reason I'm rendering in the dark is because the render still needs to set. So I did put some hardener in, but it really wasn't enough. Some accelerator, it wasn't enough to get the render right. But yeah, this is what happens when you decide to render in winter. You can get caught out. So when you're using a Powerfloat, I also give it a little hand float just before sponging. And as you can see, I did finally manage to get it. It did mean rendering in the dark, but I got a decent finish in the end. But again, this tool just takes all the hassle out of it. But it's not a miracle worker. You still have to do the traditional methods. I still like to give it a hand float. You don't have to, but I just find you get a better, flatter finish when you do. Because you could see there was still a few circular lines left from the float. And you know, a quick run over with your normal float, it just means that you've not got that in sight. Again, a lot of renderers won't do it, but I like my walls to be, I'm quite meticulous, so I just give it that little last touch to make sure. So yeah, it really does make the world a difference, and in general, I definitely recommend getting your hands on one of these, especially if you do rendering all the time, because it just saves you buckets load. I mean, it saves you lots of time, but a lot of stress on your body as well. If you're floating day in, day out, you know yourself, your elbows, your shoulders, you feel it, especially if you're doing big hits. So that's the review on the Refina Powerfloat. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you like this video, please subscribe, and yeah, keep your eye out for more videos from us. Thank you very much.
The dark, the fly should never render in winter.